Hello, my name's Robin Vincent and welcome to this new series of videos all about making music on the Surface Go. The Surface Go is the grooviest and fruitiest entry into Microsoft's Surface range. It's cheap, it's cheerful, but could it be your next mobile music making production studio? Now that's what I intend to find out. Now you would usually find me over on surfaceproaudio.com looking at the Surface Pro as a music making platform, but I got inundated with so many requests to try out the Surface Go that I thought, well, what the heck, let's give it a spin. Now of course everyone believes that it's massively underpowered, that it can't possibly do anything exciting at all. Well, that's a bit of a weird thing to say because we've been making music on computers for 20 odd years now, and way back then we had nothing like the power of this little fella. And although of course software and technology has evolved, you don't need a massive supercomputer to run a few tracks of audio, play a few synths and run a few plugins. The Surface Go is also the successor to the Surface 3. Now a couple of years ago I did a video all about the Surface 3 and compared it to the Surface Pro 3 at the time for audio performance and music making, and it did all right. I mean, it's not going to run an entire orchestra of sounds, but, you know, it did all right. It didn't do bad. And so I have every confidence that this little thing is going to do all right as well. But we won't actually know until somebody tests it out. And that's me. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to test it out. The plan for this episode is to test it as it is out of the box. What does that mean? That means Windows 10s. That means Windows Store apps. And that's it. Now I know that all you really want to know is how well it runs Pro Tools. Can it run Cubase? How many plugins can it run? Can you run Ableton Live? And a whole load of virtual instruments. Yes, I will get to that. But that's not for this episode. So to start off with, I wanted to see what apps were available in the Windows Store for music making and see if they can run, see what sort of performance you get, and whether you could just take this and go make music. So what are we trying to achieve? Well, first and foremost, we want to see whether we can get stable audio playback from any of the Windows 10 Store music making apps. Number two, I want to see if I can get a MIDI keyboard stuffed in there to start using those apps. And then number three, that takes us into checking out what the latency is like, what the feel is like. Can we get real-time playing, or is it all just a bit laggy? From there, we want to look at getting an audio input into the Surface Go. Can we install an audio interface and start plugging in microphones and guitars? And then we want to be able to have a look at how well it performs. How many tracks can it do, roughly speaking? What sort of performance can you get out of it in this situation? I'm not going to go into tremendous detail. I'll do that once we get to testing Cubase and Pro Tools and Ableton and such like and so forth, and proper virtual instruments. That's where all of that detail is going to lie in another video. But for this, just want a general feel of how well it's going to do, and what are the challenges, what are the issues, and what are the joys of music making on Windows 10s and the Surface Go. So what's Windows 10s then, I hear you say? Well, it's a special version, a mode, if you like, of Windows 10 that is streamlined and efficient and perfect for something like the Surface Go, assuming that what you want to do is surf the internet, do some emails, and probably do a bit of homework. And in that scenario, having a computer which just runs those sorts of apps that you need is ideal. You're not going to get distracted into downloading some crappy old piece of software that you always like to run, and your system isn't going to get stuffed full of nonsense that you've downloaded from the internet. This is very much like the iPad and iOS approach, where you can only run Apple approved apps, and so the iPad is super stable and super works all the time. Surface Go is the same idea. With Windows 10s, you can only run Windows Store apps. Those are bits of software that have been approved by Microsoft and are available in their store. You cannot run any other sort of executable or installation software in Windows 10s. It won't let you do it. So that means you can't install your DAW, you can't install your plugins, you can't install your virtual instruments. You can't even download the drivers to your audio interface and run that. For anything to run within Windows 10s, it has to already exist in that ecosystem. So the software has to be in the store, or for hardware, the drivers already need to exist in the Microsoft ecosystem. So yes, that means no ASIO. This means Windows drivers, Wasapi, and stuff like that. So if that hasn't scared you off, let's go and have a look to see what software we can run. So unlike the iPad App Store, there are not dozens and dozens and dozens of bits of music software you can run. No, there's a few, there's a handful. Let's stick in DAW and have a look. The ones that are the most use are StageLight from Open Labs, FL Studio Mobile from ImageLine, and Recording Studio Pro, which I've never used before, but I just discovered while making this video. Everything else is just not really related to anything at all. But there are a couple of synths, there's a few bits and pieces, and of course there's StaffPad. StaffPad is this beautiful piece of software designed very much for the Surface environment, which uses the pen to let you hand write scores directly onto the screen. So if we're going to test whether we get playback or not, why don't we start there? Yep, that's pretty good, but it's coming out of the speakers. We don't really want to use the speakers. First of all, because, well, there's speakers and we're musicians and we like big speakers. We like amplifiers. We like to hear stuff big. And also, you're not going to be able to hear this very well on the video. So we're going to go for the headphone output, which is here. Plug it in the side. What I've got is some proper, grown-up cables that I've plugged this into so that we can hear it properly through my system and on the video. So that's encouraging. Fantastic. Let's check out a few other bits of software to see whether it's all good elsewhere. Oh, geez. So yeah, that's the first box ticked. It's stable playback from a range of music apps on the Surface Go. Easy peasy. Right, can we go home now? No, not really, because it's never quite that simple. Because playback is all very well, but we want to create. We need to be able to make music, to create sequences, to record audio, all that kind of thing. And that sort of requires a bit more of my time and a little bit more depth. So stick with me, because it might get interesting and we might even learn something. So our next task is to achieve some kind of MIDI input from a MIDI keyboard. I mean, this is great. But it's not really as responsive or as exciting as using an actual keyboard. I mean, I can enter notes with this and I can play with stuff and that's fine, that's all groovy, but that's not enough for me. As a musician, I need to express myself through proper real life keys. So it's vital that the Surface Go has some kind of ability to take a MIDI controller keyboard. So considering Windows 10 S doesn't allow me to install anything, well, install some drivers, then whatever keyboard I plug into it has to be class compliant. Microsoft already has to know about it. It has to already hold the drivers so that it will be installed automatically when I plug it in. So I'm going to give my Base Station 2 keyboard, here we go, not using the onboard sounder here. This is a synthesizer, of course, but it's also a very useful controller keyboard. So I'm going to plug that in, except, oh, it has the usual, regular USB A, B, I can't remember, the regular USB connector. That's not going to go in the side of here. It doesn't have a port for it. Surface Go is so cool and so exciting that it has a USB-C socket. Ooh, well, I don't have anything at all that has USB-C on it. So the first thing you have to do is buy a hub. There you go. So that's USB-C, that cable there, that little thing. It's not mini USB, it's not micro USB, it's just USB-C. Now this is a hub from Amazon. It's an Amazon Basics hub. It's nothing flashy, it's not powered. It's just a USB-C to regular bog standard USB socket type hub thing. So we're going to plug that in. That's the sound that we love. That's the sound of Windows going, oh, it's like the collective sigh that you get of technology going, oh, that's nice, thank you. We like that noise. We should always keep that noise. I want to have that noise forever. So now I have some USB ports, I can actually plug a USB device into it. So let's do that. Aha! That's a good sound. Now with a bit of luck, StageLight is now going to understand that there's a keyboard attached. MIDI input, base station 2. Okay. Look at that. Isn't that awesome? If we go into the device manager very quickly, we can see under sound, game and video controllers over here, I'll just read it to you. It says base station 2. So the base station 2 is absolutely class compliant. You can plug it in and it will work. I wonder if any other keyboards will. I have another keyboard down here, which might be of interest. It's a bigger, chunkier one. It's the Complete Control S49 Mark II from Native Instruments. Let's see whether this fella works. I've got power. There's the noise. Oh, and another noise. It says we're setting up the Complete Control S49 Mark II. How exciting. That's that sound again. The Complete Control S49 Mark II is set up and ready to go. Gosh, I didn't quite believe it was going to be that easy. So let's check out StageLight again. No, let's try that again. Now strangely, in StageLight, the option to select a MIDI input is no longer there. It was there for the base station. I selected it from a drop-down menu, whereas now it seems to have vanished and there's stuff about auto-loading MIDI inputs. There's a MIDI output. That's strange. Let's try something else. Well, first of all, let's have a look at the device manager to see whether that has anything to tell us. Yeah, look at that. So the Complete Control S49 Mark II, although it said lovely things down here in the corner, it actually comes up with a question mark. Now I could potentially still load these drivers if I can find just the drivers. If it's contained within some kind of executable, then that's not going to work. Now we can't go and get the drivers online because they're only available as part of an executable and you can't run the software. When you try to run the driver installation, it comes up and says, I'm sorry, you can't do this. Not on this version. So what I've done is I've pulled the drivers, I think, off my other surface and stuck them on here. Let's see whether that's going to produce any fruit. So there I've got the Complete Control Mark II driver. So I'm going to update driver, browse. Installing drivers. Oh, success. So that's one bit working right. Let's do this. Let's do the same with the other bit. This device cannot start. Let's also try updating this driver. Alright, now it's come up with another one. This has turned into a bit of a task. Now the question is going to be, is it going to turn up in StageLight or any other piece of software as a valid MIDI input? Yes, it is. Look at that. Yes, it is. I think it is. So yes, it does. Look at that. Fantastic. So what that has taught us is that you can kind of force install drivers onto Windows 10s. I mean, Windows recognized it in the first instance and believed it kind of installed it, but then it needed more drivers in order to work properly, I guess, or work at all. I don't know. Then if we're able to steal and find those drivers on another system, we can bring them across on the USB key and install the thing onto Windows 10s, even though you probably shouldn't. So yeah, that was helpful. Now, of course, the complete control software is not going to work. I'm not going to get any of the access to the Native Instruments complete virtual instruments or effects, any of that jazz. All I've got is a MIDI keyboard. This is now a MIDI controller. But that's all right. That's all I'm after at this point. Look how neatly the Surface Go sits on here. I mean, because I don't need to use the screens on here, because they're of no use to me because I can't run the complete software, it becomes a very, very handy stand for the Surface Go. Awesome. So let's check that that's working in some other bits of software. In this particular app, Vintage Synth, it doesn't want to let me have any sort of MIDI input. It gives you the box in order to select things, but no options come up. They do weirdly come up as outputs, which is nice, but there's something wrong in there, so that ain't gonna work on Vintage Synth. Arc tracks. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I like that. So yeah, it's all working really rather well. We've got stable playback, we've got sounds and stuff pouring out of it. We've got FL Studio Mobile giving us a whole load of different synthesizer sounds, as well as sample-based sounds, StageLight as well, a selection of keys, pianos, drums, stuff coming out of Recording Studio Pro, whatever this thing is called. We've got sounds coming out of everywhere. It works fine with the MIDI keyboard. Playback, it's fine as far as I can hear. There's no glitching, there's no weirdness going on. It's all sounding very, very sweet. We're going to have a quick look at latency. Now, latency is one of those words that you hear a lot, no doubt. And in a nutshell, latency is the amount of time it takes for the computer to receive an instruction to generate the audio and send it to the outputs. So you hit a key, the computer goes, oh, is it a key? Starts generating the sound and then throws it to the outputs. Now that's always going to take a finite amount of time, and there becomes a point at which we notice the time that it takes, and we call that delay, the delay between hitting the key and hearing a sound, we call that latency. Now, with a good audio interface, with good audio drivers, with a good computer, latency can be minimized to the point that you don't really notice it. Generally speaking, people would say that 10 milliseconds is the flip point. So under 10 milliseconds, you probably can't feel it. Over 10 milliseconds, you start to feel a lag in your playing. Now, the thing that dictates the latency the most is the audio driver. Now, I know people like to think it's the CPU, and the CPU is definitely a factor. But the thing that defines latency the most is the quality of the audio driver. The processor has no problem processing the audio, sorting it out, generating it and that sort of thing, and then it gives it to the audio driver. And it's that exchange that really tends to affect the latency. We have these things called buffers. A buffer is a space, a piece of memory, a bucket, if you like, in which all the processing is done. So all the audio comes in, goes into the buffer, the processor goes, all right, sorts it out, makes sure it goes all out glitch free. So if you've got a nice big buffer, then the computer has all the time in the world to sort it all out, and the playback is perfect. But the size of that buffer means that the whole thing takes longer, and so you get this longer latency. To reduce the latency, you reduce the buffer, therefore reducing the amount of time the processor has to work, which increases strain on your system and on the processor, and increases the potential for glitch and clicks and pops in your audio. So any audio system on a computer is trying to drive a balance between having enough of a buffer to process the audio successfully and having it small enough to keep the latency under 10 milliseconds. Now, the latest version of Windows, with the latest version of the Windows audio system, is actually really good these days. It's got a low latency mode, which means that it can get down under 10 milliseconds and you hardly feel it. So with this application here, this drum kit here, to me, that's real time. There's no delay. If there was a delay, I'd be able to feel it and I wouldn't be able to play as well. And that's just using the standard Windows audio driver. I mean, this is head and shoulders above what it used to be, not, a year or two ago. We've been commonly dealing with sort of 20 to 30 milliseconds from Windows drivers, from standard Windows drivers. But since the Wasapi Windows audio protocol, it's been much, much better. However, there can also be a trade-off. Because the latency is so much lower, which is great, the strain on the system is that bit bigger. And so you might not be able to do as much at the lower latency as you used to be able to do at the higher latency. I don't want this all to get too complex, but let me see if I can demonstrate this in StageLight, because StageLight allows us to see and choose between the two different audio systems, and that'll be able to give us a comparison. So if you use a drum kit, which is the thing that shows latency the most when playing virtual instruments. Now, this is currently set to the standard Windows drivers, and that has that latency, as I said, of about 20 to 30 milliseconds. Can you tell by my face that it's just something not quite right about it? I can do it, I can pull it off, but it's not tight. And so it feels sluggish and you slowly get out of time with yourself and you're... It's very difficult for you to see that, but I can feel that there's a latency there. It's the same on the screen as well. It's just something not quite right about it. Now, if we look at the audio system, this is set to the old-fashioned Realtek output driver. Let me get you in a bit closer. So this says that the buffer size is set to 480 samples. That produces, generally speaking, a sort of around about 20 millisecond latency. Maybe you can see that on my fingers. Now if I change that to Windows Audio, give it a moment to restart the audio engine, this now says the buffer size is down to 96 samples. That's much more like it. That's going to be under 10 milliseconds. And I can feel that. And that is perfect. That's exactly the sort of playable latency that we want. However, you can also hear that something else is going on. And that is the first sign of glitching that we've had on the Surface Go. So let's have a little deeper look to see whether we can get to the bottom of that. Let's load up an instrument instead. Something which is going to give us a bit more trouble. Now you can hear there a couple of glitches, I think, and that is the system not quite being able to handle what we're doing. However, if we look at the CPU usage, it's only at about 20%. So there's no reason why that should be glitching. It's not got to the end of the CPU, the processor is doing fine. So there has to be something else going on. Let's put together a quick recording to see whether we can build this up and replicate the problem. Okay, we can hear that glitching without any trouble. Let's go into the audio settings, change that back to regular Windows drivers, and see whether it gives us the same issues. No, it doesn't. And over here on this little CPU meter in the corner here, it's saying sort of 10 to 15% CPU usage, whereas with the other driver loaded, it was sort of 20 to 25% CPU usage. So in that case, why don't we just stick with the original drivers? Well, the problem was because of the latency. So that is actually a really good example of how, when you reduce the latency on something, the load and the intensity on the processor goes up. In this case, it almost doubled. To use the low latency mode in StageLight, it doubled the CPU usage on exactly the same project. But perhaps what's more interesting is that regardless of which system I use, the CPU isn't troubled, it's only running at the maximum 25%, and yet I'm getting this glitchy playback. And this has always been the problem. It's the problem with every Windows computer, is that it's not about the processor, it's not about the specification of your computer. Because this project isn't using the specification, it isn't filled up the memory, it's not taxing the hard drive, and it's not taxing the CPU, and yet we have glitchy playback. And so that has to be down to other reasons. So first of all, let's try some of the settings within StageLight itself. It uses OpenGL, presumably to run the graphics side of things. Let's take that off. Yep, that solved it. So there you go. That was easy. Sometimes it's an easy fix. So StageLight, OpenGL mode. No, it doesn't like it so much. Turn that off. Works fine. Nice one. So what's next? Well, next we want to record real instruments. So how do we do that? Well, for that we're going to need an audio interface like this one. This is my sort of simplest one that I have. It's an Avid Fast Track Duo. It gives you 2 mic inputs on the front, guitar inputs as well, a couple of outputs. That's your lot. Very simple, in and out, but it's good quality, and normally speaking, on a normal computer running with ASIO drivers, it gives great performance and great low latency. How it's going to work here, in this situation, I do not know, because we can't run the ASIO drivers, we can't install them. And I'm not aware of ASIO drivers just being a little driver that you can drop into a folder. No, you need to run an installer. They need to be put in all sorts of different places. Or at least it's too complicated for me to understand. So this is purely going to have to run on Windows drivers. Or we might be able to fudge something, but again, the installer for this is an installer, not just a couple of drivers in a folder. But let's try it out and see what happens. So I've now got my MIDI keyboard going to a USB hub. I've also got a little thumb drive in there, and now I'm plugging in this, and it's all being powered off the Surface Go. Let's see whether this works. There's our noise. We love that noise. Just get off on that noise, let me hear the noise. It's on. I've got a green power light over here. Let's have a look in the device manager. Sound, game and video controllers, Avid Fast Track Duo. There she is. Now, normally speaking, you would access the control panel for this in order to set things like the buffer size in ASIO mode, etc. But we don't have that. Nothing like that is installed. The only thing that is installed is the driver for it, because Microsoft has a copy and can install it for you. Doesn't require anything else. If we open up the Windows Audio settings, we'll be able to set it to the Fast Track Duo and therefore use that in our Windows Store apps rather than the onboard sound. That should give us better sound quality and, more importantly, gives us recording inputs. Yay! So here within the sound settings, select Speakers, Avid Fast Track Duo. Now I need to take my outputs out of here, take my proper grown-up cables and plug them in the back. So that's all sounding really, really good. Now in StageLight we get access to different parts of the audio driver. So in here I can select the Avid Fast Track Duo to be the audio device rather than the sort of generic Windows driver. And that should give me some control over the buffer size being used. So I can use something sensible like, I don't know, 160 samples, and that should give me good quality, low latency performance within StageLight with the Avid interface. Let's try some drums. Yeah, that's good. That's fine. So the final piece of the puzzle is audio recording. Live recording from microphones and guitars. Now, the Surface Go by itself does have an inbuilt microphone, but you know, that's going to be pretty rubbish in terms of proper music making. We want to use microphones and guitars. We want to plug stuff into it properly, and for that we need our friend the audio interface. And so I've got the microphone plugged in, I've got the guitar plugged in, and we are ready to rock. I've got FL Studio Mobile open here. I can turn on the monitoring like so. Oh yes. And I can monitor the guitar likewise. Yeah? So all we really need to do is hit record and play. Oh, I went down the river and I got my feet wet. I went up to my big hat and I felt so dry. I went down to the basement and found a big hole. Put on my socks and flew to the sky. I flew to the sky. So let's play that back. Turn off the monitoring. Oh, I Went down the river and I got my feet wet. I went up to my big hat and I felt so dry. Now, that's not quite right, because all that's happened is that it's really just recorded what's gone in through the microphone. This is some of that kind of inconsistency we get when using the Windows Audio Protocol system thing, because within FL Studio, the only choice you have over recording is either a stereo source or a left channel or a right channel. You can't have both channels at once. It won't let you record two tracks simultaneously alongside each other, one with the vocal on, one with the guitar on. It won't let you do that. It'll only let you record a single track at a time. Now, I've spoken to ImageLine and they've said, oh, we can record in stereo. So I could have mic on the left side and guitar on the right side, although I'm not sure why I'd want to do that because I can't access those separately. I could potentially duplicate the track and then pan hard left and hard right and then affect those differently. But anyway, it doesn't actually work. So even though it's monitoring in stereo left and right, it's only recording one channel. And I don't know why that is. And as I say, FL Studio say, no, that should work fine. But it doesn't. But there's nothing I can do about it because this is Windows Audio. I can't fix it. This isn't ASIO. It's not identifying the audio interface and all its inputs and outputs as separate entities. It's just taking it all as one big Windows Audio lump. However, I could record a track of guitar and then record a track of vocals. You know, I could do that one thing at a time. Just you can only do one thing at a time. Let's check out StageLight to see if that works any better. Now, if we look at the settings within StageLight, because it gives better access to the audio engine, we can select the lovely sort of low latency option that we use, which was speakers, Avid Fast Track Duo. And that's what gave us a really good latency on playing. And we can put that down to like 160 samples and it's great, very low latency. However, when I do that, when I select that driver, I get no options for audio input at all. So that driver, the speakers driver, doesn't provide any input. So again, it's just a bit more of sort of the Windows Audio Protocol weirdness. So that's no good. I can't record with that. So I have to drop to Windows Audio, which is using the Avid Fast Track Duo through the standard Windows drivers, but that has upped the latency to 480 samples, which gives me 20 to 30, which means I'll probably get some latency during the monitoring, which you could also hear in the FL Studio one that I did. I just completely ignored it. I won't ignore it this time, I'll talk about it. But for audio inputs, I've now got left, and I've got number 2, right. Left and right. So that's looking very positive. So I add an audio track, set the input channel options, but frustratingly, the only option I get is mono 1, which must be one of the inputs. Presumably, it's the left-hand input. That tends to be the first one. I have no option for a second input. I've got no option for a stereo channel, for that matter. We turn the monitoring on. 1, 2. Okay, the monitoring is monitoring through the microphone. You can hear that. And you can probably also hear the delay between my voice and the monitoring. I mean, we're now having to deal with the sort of latency that's a distraction, because you can't really have that delayed sound in your headphones while you're trying to sing to something. It just doesn't work. It becomes implausible. And so you're essentially going to have to turn that off and monitor directly by, you know, standing beside yourself, or the Avid box itself does have a direct monitoring button, so I could monitor directly that way. But what this means is that you lose any ability to record while monitoring through effects. I mean, that's probably more useful for guitars and bits and pieces like that, to have effects going as you are recording. But it's also useful to have reverb on your voice. But with this kind of latency, that just makes that impossible. Well, I can at least lay down one thing at a time. Maybe if I change the settings so that the first input is the right input, then maybe it will let me monitor the guitar. No, it's still the left-hand channel. So it's stuck on the left-hand channel somehow. For some reason, I can't tell you why. So I'm gonna have to unplug that, turn off phantom power, and plug that in. So we've still got a bit of latency there, but it's not the end of the world, you know, it's not the end of the world. So let's see whether I can record a couple of tracks. I mean, you know, what I'm just trying to show is what you have to go through to make this work. Because I'm a believer in the surface scale, I'm a believer in StageLight and FL Studio Mobile. There are great little bits of software to record in and make music in. And I'm just trying to go through the reality of what that means so that you're under no illusions when you come to it. And that perhaps I can give you a few tips on how to use it if you did want to go down this road. And I must stress also, this is no reflection on the desktop version of StageLight or the proper full, you know, fruity version of FL Studio 20 or whatever version it is we're on now. Any difficulty that we're having here is to do with Windows 10s. It's to do with the Windows audio drivers and having to use that protocol rather than using something cool and groovy like ASIO. And perhaps by the time we get to the end of this, it will just demonstrate why you need to move from Windows 10s to Windows 10. But let's endeavour to get this something or other done. So let's record. Great, so let's unplug that. Let's plug a mic back in, put the phantom power back on, choose the second track, and then hopefully I can just record alongside. Oh yeah. Went up the mountain, foul by the riverside, found myself on fire with my pajamas hanging out of my bag. Went up the mountain, foul by the riverside, found myself on fire with my pajamas hanging out of my bag. So it's still completely possible to record into StageLight and then record another track alongside it and then start mixing. And this brings us to something else worth mentioning. I mean, StageLight comes with a bunch of effects. If I go to the plugin bit here, add an audio effect, it's got auto wah, bit crushers, compressors, delays, filters, EQs and stuff. Some of it comes with it, some of it you have to buy as sort of extra packs of bits and pieces, but they're great and they're in there. And FL Studio Mobile does a similar thing, a whole bunch of effects inside. However, StageLight also supports VST Plugins. Just put this to one side for the moment. Now, you cannot install anything into Windows 10s, I'm labouring this point, that's not in the Windows Store. You run an executable and it says, no, you can't do that. I mean, I can prove it to you if you like. So for instance, I'll take the ASIO drivers for this. I've got those here. Da-da-da, Fast Track Duo, there we go. Let's bring that over. There, lovely. Now if I double tap that to install it, it'll go, oh, nice big red screen. This mode of Windows only runs verified apps from the store, because it helps protect your PC and keep it running smoothly. So no, you can't do it, is what it's saying. If you still want to run this app, see how. Takes you to the store. Yeah, that's helpful, you think, because it doesn't have a store version of that particular file. Oh, waiting a bit might help, it says. Something happened at their end. That's hilarious. And try that again. Oh, we've got the Wheel of Fortune. There we go. So what it suggests you do is switch out of S mode, because Windows 10 gives you the freedom to choose a mode of Windows that fits the way you work and live. So you just have to hit the get button, I suppose, and then that all happens. So similarly, that's what happens when you try to install some VST plugins. However, some VST plugins are just little DLL files. They're just little single files themselves that have no installer, have no other files or bits and pieces, and can just run by themselves. So I thought, could I just drop some of those into a folder, get StageLight to scan them, and then use them? That sounds plausible, right? So within StageLight, there's settings here, plugins down the bottom. You put in the directory for those plugins, and you hit scan. Now I've put in about 16 plugins and StageLight scans them, and I get quite excited going, gosh, that's quite exciting. Here you go. So great, you think, and we'll go on to add a plugin. First of all, you get the StageLight plugins listed, then you press the little down arrow, go for external plugins, and you get nothing. Nothing there at all, not a whisper. Oh, I really thought I was onto something. Thought I could start bringing in other VST instruments, you know, simple ones that don't require massive installations, and start using those. I thought that would have been a real big bonus for StageLight in this environment. That was the only piece of software that could do that. Sadly, no, we are denied. I don't know why. I can't explain that. Maybe there's a way around it. I don't know. I've asked Open Labs about it, but I haven't heard back from them yet. So maybe that's something I can update you on at another time. But suffice to say, denied. We had an idea, we went with it, but no, access denied. Moving back into Recording Studio Pro then, just for a second, this is the one bit of software that will let me record a stereo track. I mean, this does have some audio settings, a little bit. It says the recording driver is Wasapi, and that's kind of the only option it gives me. It's got minimum latency on, so that might be better than the other ones. I don't know. And the recording device we get is purely, it just says microphone, Avid Fast Track Duo. Doesn't give me anything more than that. But I can add an audio stereo track, and then I've got that going through. I got that going through the other side as well. Now I had that in FL Studio, of course, and then it didn't quite work out. But maybe it will work out this time. So let's give it one more go, shall we? One more go. One more go. 1, 2, wait. Oh, there's a monitoring button. 1, 2. 1, 1. There is a little bit of delay on that, but it's not too bad, and it's got some reverb on it for some reason. That must be something built into the software. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. I don't know, I'm just going to assume that's okay. So let's go with it. Oh, it's off. It's there. See, I'm recording the top half and the bottom half. That's very exciting. I've got two things going at once. Right, so let's go. Let's hit it. Oh, I was driving in my car, going fast beyond the grave. I was driving my car, going left and right and up and down and not knowing where that I was gonna end up. But I came back to you. I came back to you. Woo. Yeah, so cool. Let's turn the monitoring off, play that back. Oh, it's off. It's there. See, I'm recording the top half and the bottom half. That's very exciting. I've got two things going at once. Right, so let's go. Let's hit it. So I do, in fact, have the guitar coming out of one side and the vocals coming out the other. So if I was really clever and this software would let me, I could potentially duplicate. Let's copy that, paste it, like so, then go to the mixer, pan one all the way right, pan one all the way left. No, that's the master. Like so. Oh, I was driving my car fast beyond the grave. I was driving my car going left, right, up. Alright, I don't know, did I do something? Beyond the grave, I was driving my car, going left and right and up and down and not knowing where that I was gonna end up. But I came back to you. So that is kind of potentially having two different channels going on at the same time. I was driving in my car, going fast beyond the rain. I was driving my car, going left and right and up and down and not knowing where the lights were gonna end up. But I came back to you. I don't know that software very well, but so there we go. Yeah, recording in stereo, then I can put it onto 2 tracks and I can pan it left and right, and then I've got my 2 channels recorded all at once. That performance I have captured. I have captured my live performance on guitar and vocals into a piece of software on the Surface Go in Microsoft Windows 10 S mode. Did you see that? I think that's a major breakthrough. I can see people out there now in video land going, oh, I'm sold on this now. Let me get my checkbook out. Yeah. Okay, so, well, you know, it's certainly possible, and that certainly worked. So what are we to make of this all? I mean, was this a completely pointless exercise? Should I have just spent all my time going over to normal Windows and carrying on with the normal bits of software? Well, yes, probably. But I like to be thorough. I like to make sure that I can answer the questions that people send me. And that question will be, oh, can I make music in Windows 10 S mode? So that was the question I attempted to answer. And I think I've given that a decent go. Because the answer is yes. Of course you can. Of course you can. However, there's some caveats to that. And those are along the lines of you are restricted to about 3 different bits of software. The quite remarkable Recording Studio Pro that I've never seen before, OpenLab's StageLight, which is an awesome piece of software by itself, and FL Studio Mobile, which again is a great and funky piece of mobile and portable music making software that you can run on pretty much any device on the planet. But it's sort of hampered by those bleeding Windows audio drivers, that protocol, that Wasapi thing, that thing that they do that gives so much hope of low latency and coolness and just manages just to not quite work properly. I mean, it probably works brilliantly in the right sorts of situation. I mean, if you're just making electronic music and using synth sounds and the internal sounds from FL Studio or StageLight, then great, you know, knock your socks off. You can go, you can make music, and that's not a problem. And the latency is all right, the performance is all right, and you can actually make that work. Recording audio is, again, possible, but it's not ideal. It's there, but it's sort of broken and sort of working. But it does work, because I did it, so it does. But I don't know how confident you feel about all of that. And you're going to have to deal with some pretty poor monitoring latency. And then, of course, you can't run VST instruments, you can't run VST plugins, you are stuck with the software that you can run. Can't add to it, can't improve it, can't extend it. You are stuck with that, that's all you can do. I mean, but what you can do is okay. It's okay. It's okay, it's good in many places. But that's all she wrote. So, you know, as a concept, Windows 10 S works really well. We were able to make music, and that's ultimately what we're trying to do. But I believe somewhere in my gut that that's not enough. It's not enough. I mean, the almost limitless tools that are available to us in VST format, the higher performance and lower latency that we get with ASIO drivers, the range of audio interfaces with multiple ins and out. I could record, you know, 64 channels of audio into a regular computer with regular Windows with proper DAW software. You can't do this here. You're stuck to sort of one input, one track at a time. So those limitations do certainly become apparent when comparing it to what it could do, the potential that is there. Because, I mean, the one thing that's come out of all of this is that the Surface Go is a little gem. It hasn't worried about anything. It hasn't put up a fight. It hasn't got upset. It hasn't overheated. It hasn't thrown a spanner into anything. It's just calmly and simply got on with whatever I've asked it to do. We did get a little bit of glitchy stuff going on at one point, but that was much more down to the software, and we were able to solve that than it was anything to do with the Surface Go. It's also true that I haven't really tested the limits of it yet. I'm going to do a couple of other videos using FL Studio Mobile and StageLight just to show you an entire project, putting together an entire project to see if I can find those boundaries, because those things are important. We want to know what the performance of the Surface Go is like in terms of music making. However, we're not really going to understand that until we get into proper Windows and proper DAW software. So I'm going to leave all of that detail to the next video. And if you've got all the way through this hoping that I'm going to tell you all about Pro Tools and tell you all about Ableton Live, then haha! You should stop skipping through videos, because you would have known by now that that's not what we're doing. That's all going to happen in the next video. I'm going to get to that now. I'm going to press that button that said get Windows 10. I'm going to do that shortly. And then start installing Pro Tools, Cubase, Reaper, FL Studio, Studio One, Audio Mulch. I don't know, whatever it is, those weird bits of software that people want me to try out. I'm going to try and see if I can get around to trying out as many different bits of software as I can. Because so far, it's been a really positive experience as far as the Surface Go is concerned. Windows 10S, not so much. Not so much. But then that was the point, you know, we had to find out, I had to find out whether it was possible to make music in Windows 10S, what would run, what wouldn't, and I think I've gotten to the bottom of most of that. So great, job done. So onwards and upwards, as they say. So that'll do. That's the Surface Go, that's the Windows 10S. This is the first episode of a series of videos that are going to be examining what the Surface Go can do for your music making. And I hope that's been somehow helpful. I hope that's answered some questions or even raised a whole load more. I mean, feel free to throw questions at me in the comments below, as I know you will, and you love to do so, and I love to hear them and answer them. Oh yes, I do. And if you've enjoyed this video and found it helpful, then share it around. Tell people about it. That would be great. Or if you're feeling particularly daring, you could pop along to my Patreon page, throw me a couple of dollars. That would be amazing. I mean, that's the sort of thing that funds all of this. Because I'm not sponsored by Microsoft. No, not at all. I've had to buy this myself. And things like Patreon really help in funding things like this so that I can go into detail on different products that ultimately helps you make good decisions. So it all comes around and goes around, yeah? Right, so I'm off to write a couple of tracks in FL Studio Mobile and StageLight. Look out for those coming soon to the YouTube channel. And in the meantime, go and make some tunes.